A security guard's hand was already on her shoulder. She was 7 years old. She was sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. And in her small fist, crumpled and damp from her own tears, she was holding a concert ticket that didn't belong to her. It belonged to her father. He bought it 8 months earlier. He never got to use it. 20,000 people were in that arena. The lights were down. The bass was so loud you could feel it in your ribs. And in the middle of the biggest show of his career, the most famous performer in the world stopped singing. Mid-word, mid-note just stopped. The band kept playing for 2 more seconds before they realized something was wrong. The dancers froze mid-step. 20,000 people went from cheering to confused in the space of a heartbeat. Because he'd seen something from the stage. A little girl in the front row, wearing a shirt 3 sizes too big for her, being led toward the exit by a security guard. And on the back of that shirt, in marker, were 4 words that stopped a legend cold. By the end of the night, that little girl would be standing on the same stage under the same lights her father had dreamed about for 8 months. And what happened in between is one of those stories that sounds too perfect to be real, until you understand exactly why it happened, and exactly what it cost her to be there in the first place. Stick around, because this one's going to hit different. And if stories like this are your thing, stories about grief and grace, and the moments where strangers become family, hit that subscribe button now, because we've got a lot more of these coming, and you don't want to miss them. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Every neighborhood has one, that person who loves something so much it becomes part of how people describe them. Oh, you know Danny, the guy who's obsessed with vintage cars. That's Marisol, she's the one who knows everything about basketball. In a working-class stretch of row houses in Queens, that person was a construction worker named Marcus. Marcus wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He worked long days doing hard, dangerous physical labor, came home covered in dust, and by all accounts was exactly the kind of steady, hard-working dad you'd want in your corner. But if you knew Marcus for more than 5 minutes, you knew one other thing about him. He loved music, not casually, not the way most people like a genre or have a favorite band. Marcus loved music the way some people love a religion. And more specifically, he loved one performer above all others. A global superstar we're going to call Calloway for this story. A soul and pop icon whose voice could apparently make grown men cry, and whose live shows were legendary for how much raw emotion he poured into every performance. Marcus had every album, every cassette, then every CD when those came out. Posters covering the walls of the room he used as his little home office. He'd learned the choreography from the music videos, badly, according to his wife, but with total commitment. And by the time his daughter could walk, he was already teaching her the same moves. Her name was Lily. She was 7 years old at the time our story takes place, and she idolized her father the way only a 7-year-old can idolize a parent, completely, uncritically, with her whole heart. Every night, it seemed like, Marcus would put on one of Calloway's records after dinner, and he and Lily would dance around the living room. He taught her the basic footwork of the moonwalk, or at least Jesse's version of a signature slide step, long before she could tie her own shoelaces. Their neighbors said you could hear "Come Back to Me," Jesse's biggest ballad, drifting out of their windows on warm evenings, played just a little too loud, Marcus singing along completely off-key and not caring one bit. This wasn't a hobby to Marcus. It was joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy, and he wanted to share every bit of it with his daughter. So when he found out Calloway was coming to town for a massive arena tour, the kind of tour where tickets sell out in minutes and scalpers charge triple face value, Marcus did something that, frankly, made his wife want to strangle him a little bit. He spent nearly 2 months' salary on 2 front-row tickets. Now, if you've never been a parent trying to make a family budget work on a construction worker's paycheck, let me just say, this was not a small decision. This was the kind of decision that comes with fights, with numbers scribbled on the back of an envelope, with a wife named Alina looking at her husband like he'd lost his mind. "We can't afford this," Alina told him more than once. But Marcus had this way about him, this absolute unshakable enthusiasm that made it very hard to stay angry with him for long. He'd grab Alina's hands and say something like, "Baby, this isn't just a concert. This is going to be the greatest night of our lives. Me and Lily front row, close enough to see him moonwalk right in front of us." And eventually, reluctantly, but genuinely, Alina gave in. Because how do you say no to that kind of joy? How do you tell someone not to be excited about the best thing that's ever going to happen to them? So the tickets were bought, and Lily's whole world changed. She made a calendar, an actual paper calendar taped to her bedroom wall where she marked off every single day with a gold star sticker, counting down to the concert. Every night after school, she and her dad would practice their moves in the living room, and Marcus would tell her stories, some true, some probably exaggerated for dramatic effect, about how Jesse Calloway had revolutionized music, how he'd started with nothing and become the biggest star on the planet, how seeing him live was going to be like watching magic happen right in front of your eyes. Lily believed every word. She counted down the stars on that calendar like she was counting down to Christmas morning. And then, 23 days before the concert, everything fell apart. Here's the thing about tragedy: it almost never announces itself. It doesn't wait for a convenient moment. It just happens, usually on some completely ordinary Tuesday in the middle of an otherwise unremarkable day. Marcus went to work like he always did. Construction sites are dangerous places, and everybody who works them knows it, even if they try not to think about it too much. That particular day, there was an equipment malfunction. A crane, carrying a heavy load, failed in a way it wasn't supposed to. The load swung loose, directly toward two of Marcus's coworkers who had their backs turned, focused on something else, completely unaware. Marcus saw it happening a half-second before anyone else did, and in that half-second, he made a choice that would define the rest of this story. He pushed them both out of the way. He didn't make it clear himself. Marcus was rushed to the hospital. He held on for about 2 hours. He was 32 years old. Take a second and sit with that number. 32. A father. A husband. A man who, 23 days earlier, had spent 2 months of his salary because he wanted his little girl to experience something magical. A man whose last act on this earth was saving 2 other people's lives without a moment's hesitation. When the hospital called Alina, Lily's gold star calendar was still taped to her bedroom wall. 23 days left unmarked. 23 gold stars that would never get stuck on. I want you to imagine for a second being 7 years old and losing your father like that. Not a long illness where you have time to prepare, to say goodbye, to process it in pieces. Just gone. One ordinary morning he kisses you before school and he never comes home. After the funeral, Alina didn't know what to do with those tickets. Throwing them away felt wrong, like throwing away the last thing her husband had been excited about, the last dream he'd been looking forward to. But going to that concert without him, that felt impossible, unbearable even. She put them in a drawer and tried not to think about it. But Lily had other ideas. 4 days before the concert, Lily walked up to her mother and said, with the kind of clarity that 7-year-olds sometimes have that completely disarms adults, "I want to go, Mommy." Alina tried to gently talk her out of it. "Mija, I don't know if that's a good idea. It might be too hard." And Lily, this tiny person who had just lost her father and was somehow, in some ways, holding herself together better than the grown-ups around her, said something that Alina would remember for the rest of her life. "I know it'll be hard, but Daddy spent all that money. He was so excited. If we don't go, it's like his dream dies too. I want to keep it alive." Read that again. A 7-year-old said that. Alina looked at her daughter and made a decision most of us would find genuinely terrifying. They would go. On the night of the concert, Lily insisted on wearing one of her father's t-shirts, an old Jesse Calloway concert tee from years earlier, a men's large, absolutely swallowing her tiny frame, hanging down past her knees like a dress. It still smelled like him, sawdust and coffee and the particular cologne he wore. It wasn't a fashion choice. It was the closest thing to a hug she could get. She also brought his ticket. He'd kept it in his wallet in the weeks before he died, taking it out to look at it, counting down just like she was. Lily held that ticket in her hand the entire ride to the arena like it was something sacred, proof that her dad was supposed to be here, proof that this night was always meant to include him. When they arrived at the arena, Lily was, and this is important, okay, scared, sad, but okay. She thought she could do this. She thought she could sit in that front row and honor her father by experiencing the thing he'd spent 8 months dreaming about. And then the lights went down. There's something about a packed arena going completely dark right before a show starts. The anticipation. The roar of 20,000 voices building into something almost physical. For most kids, that's the most exciting moment of the whole night. For Lily, it was the moment everything broke. The darkness hit her like a wave. Surrounded by screaming strangers, no father's hand to hold, no dad lifting her up so she could see over the crowd, the reality of it all crashed down on her at once. Daddy should be here. Daddy should be holding her hand right now. Daddy should be the one losing his mind with excitement, doing his terrible off-key singing, making this whole thing feel magical the way only he could. Instead, there was an empty seat beside her, a void shaped exactly like the person she needed most. Lily started crying, not the quiet, controlled tears she'd already learned at 7 years old, to hide at school so the other kids wouldn't ask questions. These were the deep, gasping sobs of a child whose grief had finally caught up with her in the worst possible place, at the worst possible time. Alina pulled her close, trying to shield her, whispering that they could leave if she needed to. But Lily didn't want to leave. Leaving felt like giving up, like admitting her father's dream had died along with him. She shook her head through the sobs, but she could not make herself stop crying. Then the show started. Jesse Calloway appeared through an elaborate entrance full of pyrotechnics and fog and dramatic lighting. The crowd absolutely lost their minds. The bass was so loud Lily could feel it vibrating in her chest. Dancers moved in perfect, precise synchronization across a massive stage. And Lily cried through all of it. She couldn't see the show through her tears. She couldn't even really hear the music over the sound of her own crying. The concert she and her father had waited 8 months for was happening right in front of her, and all she could feel was the crushing absence of the one person who was supposed to be sharing it with her. By the third song, Alina had seen enough. This wasn't working. Her daughter was inconsolable, and staying was clearly making things worse, not better. It was time to go home. She flagged down a security guard. "I'm sorry," she said, straining to be heard over the music. "My daughter, her father just passed away. These were his tickets. I think we need to leave." The guard nodded with real sympathy. He'd worked hundreds of shows. He'd seen overwhelmed kids, scared kids, exhausted kids. But a grieving 7-year-old in the front row, wearing her dead father's shirt, was something entirely different, and it clearly got to him. "I understand, ma'am. Let me help you out." He began guiding them toward a side exit, away from the crush of the crowd. And that's when Jesse Calloway saw them. Here's something you might not know about performers at that level. The really great ones, the ones who become legends instead of just famous, they're often watching the crowd just as intently as the crowd is watching them. It's part of how they read a room, how they know when to slow down, when to bring the energy up, when a song is landing exactly the way they hoped. Jesse had been watching the front row between songs, the way he often did to feel connected to the people closest to him. He'd clocked the crying little girl earlier and assumed, reasonably, that she was simply overwhelmed, overstimulated, scared by the pyrotechnics, maybe. It happens with kids at big shows. But now he saw a security guard actively walking them out. He saw the mother's face, and it wasn't just tired, it was devastated. He saw the little girl, still sobbing, clutching something tightly in one small fist. A ticket, he realized. She was holding a ticket like her life depended on it. And then he noticed the shirt, way too big for her, clearly not hers, clearly belonging to a man, and on the back, written in what looked like permanent marker, 4 words. "For you, Dad, we made it." Jesse stopped singing mid-word. The band faltered for a couple of beats, confused, before catching up to the sudden silence. The dancers stopped moving, glancing around, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. The crowd's energy flipped instantly from euphoric to confused, because this was absolutely, definitely not part of the show. But Jesse was already moving. He walked to the very edge of the massive stage, crouched down, and pointed directly at the security guard, saying something urgent that the crowd couldn't hear but could clearly see mattered. Security moved fast, clearly unsure what exactly was happening, but following his direction without question. Within seconds, Lily and her mother were being brought back toward their seats instead of away from them. Then Jesse did something nobody expected. He jumped down off the stage. The crowd gasped audibly. This was a superstar known for elaborate staging, choreographed to the second, everything planned down to the last spotlight cue. Nobody just jumps off the stage. Security rushed forward on instinct, but he waved them off. He walked straight toward Lily and her mother, and when he reached them, the biggest star in the world knelt down. Not bent at the waist. Knelt, all the way down, so he was looking up slightly into the eyes of a sobbing 7-year-old. "Hi," he said gently, somehow audible even in that chaos. "What's your name?" Lily just stared at him, tears still streaming, unable to get a word out. "It's okay," Jesse said. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I saw you crying, and I saw your shirt." He nodded toward it. "For you, Dad, we made it. Can you tell me what that means?" And in a voice barely above a whisper, Lily managed. "My daddy died 3 weeks ago. These were his tickets. He was supposed to be here." If you've ever watched footage of a performer having a genuinely unscripted emotional moment on stage, you know it's different from anything rehearsed. You can see it in the eyes. Even from a distance, even through stage lighting, something shifts. That's what happened to Jesse in that moment. He looked up at Alina, who nodded through her own tears, confirming everything. "Your daddy sounds like he was an amazing man," Jesse said quietly. And then, gently, "You know what? He was right about one thing. Tonight is going to be magic, just not the kind he was picturing." Lily looked at him, confused through her tears. "The magic isn't in the show," Jesse explained. "The magic is that you're here, that you were brave enough to come, even with your heart broken like this. That you're keeping your dad's dream alive instead of letting it disappear. That's the real magic right there." He stood up and held out his hand. "Will you come up on stage with me? I want to sing something for your dad. And I want you right there next to me so you can feel how much love is in this room tonight, because all of it, all this love from all these people, it's not just for me. Tonight, it's for you and your dad, too." Lily looked to her mother. Elena, crying harder now than she had all night, nodded. "Okay," Lily whispered. Jessie picked her up, this tiny girl swallowed by an oversized shirt, still clutching her father's ticket in one hand, and carried her back through the crowd. The confusion in the arena slowly gave way to understanding as people began to realize something extraordinary, something completely unplanned, was unfolding in front of them. A murmur rippled through the crowd, building into applause, then into a full standing ovation as Jesse climbed back onto the stage with the little girl in his arms. He set her down gently on an equipment case near the band, somewhere she could see everything clearly. Then he turned to face 20,000 people and his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of the moment, "I want you to meet someone very special. This is Lily. She's 7 years old. Her dad was supposed to be here tonight. He bought these tickets 8 months ago because he wanted to share this night with his daughter. But Lily's dad passed away 3 weeks ago. He never got to keep that promise." The arena went completely, totally silent. 20,000 people holding their breath together. Lily's dad loved music. He loved life. And he loved his daughter enough to spend 2 months' salary just to give her one perfect memory. "So we're going to do something right now. We're going to sing a song for Lily's dad, and wherever he is, we're going to make sure he knows his little girl is okay, that she's loved, that she is not alone tonight." He looked at the band, then back down at Lily and sat beside her on the equipment case. "What was your dad's favorite song?" he asked her quietly. "Come Back to Me," Lily said. "He said it made him cry every time. He said you sang it like your heart was breaking." Jesse nodded slowly. That song was, in fact, one of the hardest things he performed, a devastating ballad about loss that he rarely got through without feeling it himself. "Then that's what we'll sing," he said, "for your dad." The band eased into the gentle opening notes. Jesse stayed seated right beside Lily, and as he began to sing, he reached over and held her hand. "I want you to really picture this for a second. One of the biggest stars on the planet, sitting on an equipment case instead of standing center stage under his own carefully designed lighting rig, holding the hand of a grieving 7-year-old, singing a song about loss directly to her." The performance was devastating in the best possible way. His voice, already known for carrying real emotional weight, had something extra in it that night. An understanding of exactly what this child was feeling, an acknowledgement of how much loss actually hurts. A quiet promise delivered through music that love doesn't just evaporate because someone dies. Lily cried through the entire song. And this matters, they were different tears now. Not the hopeless, drowning tears from earlier in the night. Healing tears. The kind that come when someone finally sees you in your pain instead of trying to fix it or rush you past it. Jesse cried too. He couldn't fully hold it together, singing a song about loss to a child who understood loss far too intimately for her age. Near the final notes, the part of the song where his voice traditionally breaks with emotion even under normal circumstances, he looked at Lily and said quietly, just for her, "Your dad hears this. I promise you, he hears it." By the time the last note faded out, there was not a single dry eye in that entire arena. 20,000 strangers had just witnessed something that had nothing to do with entertainment and everything to do with what it means to actually see another human being who is hurting. Jessie walked Lily off the stage and back to her mother. Before they parted, Lily did something that surprised absolutely everyone watching, including her own mother. She reached up and hugged him, a real hug, tight, desperate, and grateful all at once. "Thank you," she whispered. "Daddy would have been so happy." "I know he would have," Jessie said back. "And Lily, he's proud of you for being brave enough to come tonight, for keeping his dream alive instead of letting it go. That's what love does. It keeps living even when we think it's gone." Alina couldn't speak. She just mouthed "thank you" over and over, unable to form anything more coherent. Jessie nodded. He understood everything she couldn't say out loud. The rest of the concert felt different after that. There was a shift in the room, an awareness that had settled over 20,000 strangers, that life is fragile, that love matters more than almost anything else, and that sometimes the most important moments happen when someone is willing to stop everything and notice a person who is hurting. After the show, Jessie's team arranged for Lily and Alina to come backstage. He'd changed out of his stage outfit, but was still in his performance makeup when he met them again. He handed Lily one of the sequined gloves he'd worn during the show. "This is for you and your dad," he said. "So you always remember tonight, so you always remember that love doesn't end." Then he made her a promise. "Every year on this date, wherever I am in the world, I'm going to dedicate Come Back to Me to your dad, to Marcus. So you'll always know that somebody, somewhere, still remembers him." And according to people who followed his career closely in the years after, he actually kept that promise. For the rest of his touring career, every single year on that date, he'd pause before that song and say a version of the same thing. "This one's for Marcus. Lily, I hope you're listening." Lily always was. Here's where the story goes somewhere I think is even more meaningful than the concert itself. Lily is in her late 30s now. She became a music therapist in New York, someone who uses music professionally to help children work through grief and trauma. If you think about that career choice for even a second, it's not hard to understand exactly where it came from. In her office, she keeps that sequined glove framed on the wall, alongside her father's unused ticket and a photograph from that night, 7-year-old Lily, standing on a massive stage next to the biggest star in the world. She still plays Jessie's music constantly. She still does the little slide step her father taught her, and now she teaches it to her own kids. And every year on the anniversary of that concert, she lights a candle, plays Come Back to Me, and remembers the night a global superstar stopped an entire show to tell a grieving little girl that her father's love hadn't actually died with him. "My dad gave me music," Lily has said, describing that period of her life. "But that night gave me permission to grieve and still find joy at the same time. It showed me that my dad's love didn't die with him. It just found a new way to reach me." When Jesse Calloway eventually passed away himself, years later, Lily traveled to attend a public memorial for him. She brought her father's old Jesse Calloway t-shirt, the same one she'd worn that night at the arena, and left it among the flowers and tributes outside the venue. The card attached to it read, "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for stopping. You gave me a gift that night that I carried my whole life, the knowledge that even in our darkest moments, somebody might notice and might actually do something about it. You taught me that love doesn't end, it just transforms." When Lily had her first child, years after all of this, she named him after both men. A quiet way of keeping two people alive at once, her father and the man who helped her survive losing him. I think it's worth pausing here at the end and asking, why does a story like this stick with people the way it does? I don't think it's really about fame. It's not really about the fact that a famous person did something kind. Plenty of famous people do kind things, and most of them don't end up as stories people tell each other for decades. I think it's about the choice in that specific moment. Jesse Calloway had every reason not to stop the show. He had a stage full of dancers waiting, a band mid-song, 20,000 paying fans expecting a flawless performance, and a very good excuse. The show must go on, sitting right there if he'd wanted to use it. Instead, in the middle of the biggest professional moment of his night, he chose to notice one hurting child over everything else that was supposed to matter more. And that's really the whole lesson, isn't it? You don't need to be famous to do that. You don't need a stage or a spotlight or 20,000 witnesses. You just need to be willing to actually stop, to notice the person who's struggling next to you instead of staying comfortably focused on whatever you had planned. The little girl in the oversized shirt grew up to spend her entire career helping other grieving children heal. The father who died far too young left behind a kind of love that outlasted him by decades. And the superstar who jumped off his own stage taught an entire arena. And now, hopefully, everyone watching this, that the most important performance of your life is rarely the one you rehearsed. It's the one where you simply notice someone who's hurting and choose to do something about it. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor, hit subscribe, and share it with someone who might need the reminder today that even in the darkest moments, somebody might actually notice. Somebody might actually stop. And that's more powerful than any of us usually give it credit for. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.